de megatendencias, por ejemplo, de la tendencia de la ciberseguridad concretamente. Vamos a hablar con Rahul Bhushan, que es cofundador de Rize ETF, una compañía que aterrizó aquí en España en 2021 y que además pues tiene ya varios ETFs aquí en nuestro país, pues ETFs del sector de alimentación sostenible, de la ciberseguridad o también del cannabis médico. Podemos saludar ya a Rahul. Rahul, thank you so much for being here in Negocios Televisión.
Thank you very much for having me. It's great to be with you today.
It's a pleasure for me too. We're going to talk about cybersecurity because it's turning into a social phenomenon, and investor interest, public pressure, employee demands and governmental regulations are strengthening the incentives for organizations to track and report cybersecurity goals and metrics within their ESG efforts as a business requirement. Cybersecurity, Rahul, has now existed as a mega trend, we could say, for several years. What will continue to drive this trend forward in the next few years, and won't we see this theme mature eventually?
Yeah, it's a really good question. You know, we Rize ETF and the founders of our company, including myself, you know, we've been looking at this theme for a pretty long time. Since 2014, we actually launched Europe's first cybersecurity ETF in October 2014. And so, you know, it's interesting when we think about cybersecurity and the continuous evolution of this theme. You know, if you go back to 2014, there were around 30 companies in a basket that we put together to track the underlying theme. You know, 8 years later, we're now at 55 companies in our basket. So, you know, although one would think that, you know, some of these things have the possibility, the eventual kind of a termination date, if you will, a maturity date, I think 8 years later, all we have gotten to is actually an industry that's almost twice the size that it was 8 years ago. So that gives us a lot of confidence. And, you know, we can actually go back even further and, you know, trace the first ever cyber attack that happened in the world, which was the Morris worm in 1988. So you can actually think of this particular thematic as having existed for almost 30 years. So, you know, we're really confident about the future for cybersecurity, and especially in the world that we live in today. Geopolitics is changing, the world is changing, and there are a lot of new secular drivers that are going to drive spending in more cybersecurity products and services. So yeah, we're very confident. We think this is a theme that's here to stay, and we watch it with keen interest and hope and continue to believe that this industry is going to grow and achieve, you know, even an even greater size over time.
Cyber attacks related to third parties are increasing. Concern about cyber risk in the digital ecosystem is becoming critical. We see how companies make efforts to demonstrate their commitment to reducing the social issues that may arise from cybersecurity incidents. Of course, data breaches of customer personal information are in focus. Could we understand, Rahul, that cybersecurity goes hand in hand with data privacy?
Absolutely, yes. I would. I mean, we've believed that from the beginning of our product launch in 2020. You know, this kind of convergence that we're seeing between cybersecurity and data privacy, we believe is real. It's here to stay. So much so, in fact, that we put cybersecurity and data privacy into the name of our fund. So, you know, as cybersecurity has sort of gone from being a conversation that was on the sort of tech support desk to the information and data security teams to the CIO office, and now become a very key part of boardroom conversations around the world. At the same time as that's happened, you know, we've seen cyber defense going from a business issue to a government issue to now a geopolitical issue, and increasingly, and this is where we find a lot of interest from investors, is it's becoming more and more of a public concern. So the attacks that we see today really are starting to blur this line that we've historically had, you know, between the safety, so to speak, in the digital world and safety, so to speak, in the physical world. And so, you know, while we used to think about cybersecurity and privacy as two, you know, distinct issues, these conversations are now converging. And, you know, we no longer think about cybersecurity as, you know, making your digital perimeter bigger and wider. Instead, you know, we're also increasingly talking about how to prevent leaks from the inside out. So, governance structures around data that prevent privacy breaches from occurring in the first place, often linked to the human element within an organization, which is, very often the biggest threat. If employees and people that work for an organization haven't been adequately trained, then there's a high risk that data, sensitive consumer data, leaks out into the public domain. So this kind of unintended consequence, if you will, of not ensuring that your employees are adequately trained around cybersecurity risks. So for us, therein lies the sort of challenge, because on the one hand, companies, they need consumer data, but they don't want that consumer data in the public domain. At the same time, consumers want a really good service, so they're happy with companies, having some of their consumer data, but they don't want any of their sensitive consumer data being handled just by anyone in an organization. They want there to be a governance structure in place. So we believe that bridging this conversation between cybersecurity and privacy is going to be a real challenge and opportunity for the next decade.
At Rize ETF, which companies do you have at the forefront?
So it's a really good question. We always get asked this question quite a lot, and it's hard not to mention the same companies over and over, because some of these companies are just really exciting to us. I think for me personally, and this might, by the way, this might vary, as you speak to different members of the Rize team. I think people tend to have their own favorites. But for me personally, there's one company in particular that I'd like to highlight, which actually links in to the previous point around privacy, and that's a company called KnowBe4. KnowBe4 is actually unlike your traditional cybersecurity companies that are offering products and services, whether it's hardware or software, or some sort of solutions-oriented SaaS-type security software business. The interesting thing about KnowBe4 is these guys are actually operating in the physical space. They're offering employee cybersecurity awareness training programs. So simulation of cyber attacks and helping employees effectively train themselves to equip employees to be more prepared for when cyber attacks do occur. And we particularly like this company because I think they're bridging the gap that has previously existed. It's not just, like we said, about protecting the perimeter from the outside in. It's increasingly becoming about preventing, unintended leaks from the inside out, and this idea of privacy once again. So we really like KnowBe4. It's a really interesting company. They haven't been publicly listed for very long, but we followed them with quite a lot of interest. I think the other company I would probably also highlight is a company called CrowdStrike, which they have a bit of a Twitter personality, if you will, and we follow them with quite a lot of keen interest. But for listeners who aren't aware of CrowdStrike, they're actually the company that in 2016 discovered the attack on the U.S. election, and that's when their name sort of became very mainstream. They were able to identify that there were two Russian state-sponsored attack groups that had interfered in the U.S. election, and as a result of that, have become a bit of a household name. CrowdStrike actually went public 4 years ago, so 2 years after the U.S. election in 2016. So we've been following again this company with a lot of interest. They have a platform called Falcon, which we think is a really a next generation cybersecurity platform for two major reasons. One, it's a cloud native platform. So this company is really born as a cloud security company, which makes it fundamentally unique to some of the cybersecurity companies that have been around for much longer. And number two, they use really effective machine learning and artificial intelligence technologies integrated into what their endpoint security solutions are able to deliver. So this idea of making the security infrastructure smarter and smarter over time, and I think that's a very compelling reason for why we track and maintain a keen interest in this particular company as well.
Rahul, is the investment case for cybersecurity now stronger than it was prior to the current market downturn?
So this is what we're seeing. What we've seen in the last, I would say, 6 months is a lot of these companies that were previously trading at 40 to 50 times earnings. These multiples have, in many cases, halved for companies, and sometimes even gone further down. 60% down in terms of the multiples, 65% down on some of these multiples. So if you're an investor who has been interested in technology stocks for the last couple of years, now is actually, we believe, a pretty interesting and compelling entry point for some of these themes. Cybersecurity, being a very interesting one because of its defensive qualities and its ties into the changing geopolitical landscape that we're seeing in Europe in particular at the moment. Again, we've been following this particular theme for about 8 years, and we as a group are the most experienced team in Europe following this particular thematic area. And so when we look at this, what we're seeing is really exciting at the moment, because you have some of these thematics that are just severely underappreciated and underpriced at the moment. So we think that a lot of capital will go into some of these companies, which are ultimately they're very good companies, and be able to enter at this attractive price for that long-term investment case. So to your question, yes, we believe that from a multiples perspective, this is a really interesting time. I think the other thing I would highlight is the regulatory and supranational tailwinds behind this sector. We've seen that Europe now is massively expanding their defense budgets, not just in Germany, but as a EU collective. And I think a lot of that is going to go into digital defense as well, because it's a key area of defense today. It's not just about physical and security in the sort of traditional sense when we watch films and so on. It's really about how do we protect ourselves, and how do we protect all of the physical infrastructure that we have that's now digitally integrated, and cybersecurity is a key and necessary component of that. So the regulatory and the supranational tailwinds, not just, so the regulatory, when I say regulatory, I mean particularly the data privacy element, the consumer protection element, and then and then the supranational element is really this the attention at the level of the EU that this industry now has, which also is we believe a very powerful tailwind that's going to drive and propel this sector forward.
Looking at the future, Rahul, by 2026, it's expected that 30% of large organizations will have publicly shared ESG goals focused on cybersecurity, up from less than 2% in 2021. What ESG considerations are unique to cybersecurity?
I would say well, I think the one consideration that's absolutely unique is the considerations around, are you investing in an industry, in a sector, in companies that have material ESG risks? And when you look at some of the companies engaged in cybersecurity products and services, you do often uncover companies that have, nuclear weapons, for example, exposure, controversial weapons exposure, military contracting as part of their business offering. Perhaps they're offering some of these products to governments, who are then selling that on to other governments in some cases. So indirect exposure, where that's being used perhaps for not so ESG activities. And so I think really those three elements are probably the ones that are most unique: controversial weapons, military contracting, and nuclear weapons, as far as we've seen. And we can kind of link that to companies like BAE Systems, Lockheed Martin, Leidos is another one, Mantech International is another one. So these kind of big defense names that have some residual exposure in cybersecurity, but that's not their core business. Most of their business is really in defensive capabilities, and they've got this sort of residual exposure to cybersecurity. Two reasons we don't capture those companies in our fund. Number one, we want to be able to snip out any sort of material ESG risks. But number two, in our assessment of these companies, we never discovered any material exposure to cybersecurity products and services in the first place. So had they not been removed for ESG reasons, they would have been removed in any case for pure play reasons, one of the things that we take quite seriously when we build thematic funds is making sure that the companies that we're putting in our funds are pure plays. The last element, and I don't think this one is unique to the cybersecurity theme, but it's really this element of governance. You know, when you're investing in any thematic fund, whether it's cybersecurity or robotics or electric vehicles, and a key element to look at is that the companies are getting good governance scores. Are they are they really addressing those key governance risks in their business activities or not? And there are companies, and the one that springs to mind is NAPCO Security Technologies in the US, who actually failed to meet our governance screen at the last index rebalance. But yeah, there's not that many that fail on the governance front. There's just a couple in our assessment, and those are the ones that we also exclude. But again, that's not unique to cybersecurity. That's kind of something any ESG investor should be considering.
Rahul Bhushan, co-founder at Rize ETF. Thank you so much for being here in Negocios Televisión.
Thanks very much. Appreciate the time.
Bueno, y vamos